Welcome to Athena in Truth's YouTube channel, where we provide tips and insights for you to live your best life. I am your host, Heidi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our YouTube. Today we have some special guests. We have Robin's sons, Mike and Brad, as well as author Robert Althuis, who wrote the book Love and Truth. Before we get started today, I just wanted to make a couple announcements. We have our course, Choose Your Universe, Part 2. That is starting on October 10th, and we have a few spaces still available in that course. And we also have our downloadable course on Kundalini energy. That is available now as well. So if you would go to our Athena in Truth website, you can find both of those courses and information on them under the courses tab. Thank you. So Robert, welcome.
Thank you.
We'd like to get started with you. If you'd like to give us a little background on your life and how things
Sure,
started
and
for
I'll,
you.
I'll I'll try to keep it short because I'm an old guy, so I lived a lot of life. But I'm originally from Holland. I was 21 when I left. I had a beautiful childhood, really. My father was a successful CEO. My mother was her own business owner, but then she became actually an astrologist and a graphologist, and so that's really where some of that spirituality got early seeded in me. And I went travel around the world. I was a skipper of yachts. I was kind of a journeyman tennis pro for a little bit, and I landed in Atlanta right before the Olympics. That's where I got into real estate. I went to night school, and I kind of, got into pursuing the American dream. Let's put it that way. And I do everything full speed, as my mom will tell you. And so I went after that with a vengeance, and I was very successful in it. It was a great time as well to be in real estate. And then I ended up graduating summa cum laude, and then I got into Columbia Business School, and so I went that route. I got recruited by GE Capital, and I did business deals all over the world for their aircraft leasing unit, and we built airports as well. And then I got top 1% there, and then the financial crisis hit. We were doing a lot of cowboy stuff, so we divested all these different businesses that I was part of. And then I picked up a little asset from GE and I bought it out. And that's how I got into business for myself. So now I was truly living the American dream. I was my own boss. And I had this boutique investment firm, development firm for actually, I still own some of it. But I built airports around the world. So I ended up being very deeply engaged in Latin America. I had a lot of airport projects there. I worked with all kinds of big pension funds and private equity and all the fancy bankers and World Bank and all that stuff. And I swam with the sharks and I became a shark. And slowly but surely, I kind of eroded away my integrity on multiple different levels of my life. And so as I made more money and had more fame and fortune and applause in the outer world, I was really, really eroding the inner world. Until about 2015, I sold most of my business, and then I had a spontaneous spiritual awakening. The universe had decided that that was fun, but it was time to go in a different direction. And at the time, I didn't really know what it was, but my claircognizance, clairsentience came online, which actually runs on my maternal side of the family. And I really was grappling with this metamorphosis that the universe just was kind of nudging me to. And I try to resist and I try to keep doing what I was doing, thinking that, if I make a little bit more money, then, maybe all this stuff will go away. And of course it didn't. And then the universe actually stripped me naked. Eventually I went in 2017, I lost my father, and I went through a divorce, and then I had a hurricane wipe out one of my businesses. And that actually wiped out my got this domino effect on my balance sheet. And so by the end of 2017, I was really stripped naked by the universe, and I had nowhere else to go but inside. And so that really pushed me on this spiritual journey, which I've been on since. And I wrote my first book about it, Never Enoughitis, because it's never enough. It's kind of the pursuit of the outer world. We're trying to fill up this void and this stuff in the outer world. And then now I just wrote my second book, Channel Work, Love and Truth.
Okay. So when I was perusing the chapter of your book that you had sent to us, you talk about a game man and a game spirit, and I thought that was very clever. And I would like
Well,
you to
place,
give
right?
our
So
our audience,
yeah, it's the game man place versus the game spirit place.
yeah, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. If you could
And
just
I
give a little background on what that
Sure.
means to the
Yeah, yeah.
audience.
No, and it's a whole chapter. So the book is 5 parts, and the first part is kind of laying a foundation, a foundational understanding of what is actually this reality that we live in, which most of us are, sort of confused about because we don't really understand, what we're what we're here to do. And so the finite games that I talk about is the game man plays. So what are the game man plays? Well, we go after trophies, right? And so trophies are money, wealth, houses, accolades, status, all those things that matter in the outside world, all the stuff that our world idolizes, really. Now, that's not the one infinite game that spirit is playing. And spirit, I interchange these words quite a bit because everybody can have their personal preference. So if you'd like to call that God or creator or spirit or great spirit or infinite intelligence, or you want to go to science route and call it quantum field, I'm not hung up on what you call it. But there is a vast intelligence, a universe that is of an infinite intelligence, and that is playing an entirely different game through us. And this very much ties into Robin's book. Something is trying to express itself through us. Now, that is the game
Right,
spirit plays. And that has entirely different
right.
rules and has an entirely different game. And that is actually the only game that is playing at all timelines at all times. All finite games, these game man plays, are actually wrapped up inside this one finite, infinite game.
Okay. So let's go over to Mike. Mike is an entrepreneur. He started several online businesses. He's a very successful young businessman.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, would you like to weigh in on have you seen that play out in your life, game man versus game spirit?
I mean, yeah, I can like totally relate to the stuff you're saying. I think like I was in the same sort of process of chasing the whole money thing, right? Like I need equity in a company so that it'll sell for $1 billion and I'll make a bunch of money and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do later. And then that's like this carrot that's put in front of you that just keeps getting dragged and dragged and dragged further. And you end up kind of losing your own identity in terms of like who you want to be, how you want to act, and what you want to do, and you find yourself sort of falling into a role of who you should be versus who you actually are. So that kind of happened to me like throughout my 20s, I think, where I sort of kind of got into like the sort of executive corporate type of thing. I was never like a really serious person. I just wanted to have fun and work on music and do stuff like that. But I ended up finding myself being really good at something that was in business. And then before I know it, I'm like having to be this serious person and have these disciplinary conversations with employees and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, I just don't like this. But it's really interesting though, the whole reason why, like you were just saying about the man space or whatever, was essentially for chasing money, which is for me freedom, not necessarily status. But at the end of the day, I think you can have freedom without having like that huge like bank account, right? So I think that's kind of what I learned, like probably in the last 10 years, but I can definitely relate to the things you were saying there.
Yeah,
And Brad,
sorry.
oh,
No, Robert,
no,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead,
wanted
Robert.
to tie in because what Mike was saying, when we get lost in the game man plays, right? We tend to get lost in doing, and we forget the being. And there's a very big difference, and I go very deeply into this in my book, that really we're human beings. And so doing can come from a place of being, or we can just be lost in doing. And we forget all about being. And that's actually what Mike was just kind of pointing at, because in this outside world, we get rewarded, we get applauded, we get, status or whatever it might be from doing a lot.
Right. Yeah. Brad, you are in a stock trader, futures trader. You've experienced, I know, a lot of things also that Robert has been talking about. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this forever. I've been a stock and futures trader since I was forever, my whole adult life, so like 22 years now. So it's been a emotional button pusher for spiritual progress and growth, and I'm very interested in this stuff. So I've done a lot of the Vipassana silent retreats and all this stuff that I was called to along the way. And then I think where I'm at right now is just reading your chapter, what you talked about, just doing the dishes, and how if you can't do the dishes, then what's the point of your spiritual practice? And I think Mike and I had a discussion today about little things in our life that come up, like eating at night or drinking wine when you're stressed out. And I feel like those little moments are kind of when your spirituality meets your regular life. So my bigger question is there's this intellectual understanding that I think a lot of people have, and we all have, about you read these great books and you understand the big game, the small game, and that you're the spirit expressing yourself as a human. But then the actual living proof of your life, that you're standing back and watching that and not getting caught up in it, and all the layers of like someone dying or losing your money versus like you're just irritated with your neighbor and they put their trash out funny, and being able to do that, I feel like is, how does that happen? I mean, my understanding is, maybe that's an Athena question as well, is remembrance, like you talked about, that higher knowing leaks in. Does it leak in after massive suffering? It leaks in layers, and you said yours leaked in spontaneously, and I'm just putting that out there as something to talk about. Is that different for everyone? It seems like it is.
Yeah, I would say the awakening was spontaneous, where for a lot of people it's maybe more gradual, and for me it just switched on. Now that doesn't mean that I was, enlightened overnight, because that's not the way it works. I was struggling greatly because I didn't really understand what to do with all these, these psychic abilities and these just things that came online. But to give you an example of where being and doing, and for instance, even in the profession you do, because I was in finance and I have a lot of thoughts about that. And it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't matter what you do, actually. It doesn't matter if you're a carpenter or you're in banking or you're, whatever it is that you do. You could be a homemaker. It's how are you being in that which you are doing, right? And to give it an example, and I think this came back in your book as well, Robin, very, very profoundly, is that the level of ascension that you can achieve or rise into has to do, in my opinion, with two big things. First of all, how much darkness inside can you basically face and really see in yourself for what it is? And the second part is how much accountability and responsibility are you willing to step into? And so I'll give you an example of my personal life. I was in business school in New York, and it was, around 2000, and I was partying, having a grand old time in New York and just being a business school student, right? And so, we would go party and we would go snort lines of coke and we would do all kinds of stuff. What happens in high Wall Street circles. Now, when you snort a line of coke, you could say, well, I'm damaging my personal health. Well, that's one aspect. But you have the blood in Mexico in the streets in your nose as well. And so ascending and rising in consciousness is realizing that everything I do is tethered to something else in this universe. John Muir, who started the Shara Foundation, said, if you pull at anything in nature, you are pulling the entire universe. And so the consciousness, the awareness, the aperture that opens up as you kind of go down this path is like, everything I do has some entanglement with this universe. And so, for instance, in your profession, and there's nothing wrong with being in finance or trading or any of those things, but I've been in high finance, and we financed all kinds of stuff that we somewhere deep down inside knew were not maybe the best for everybody involved. It didn't serve the greater good. It served our good. And so I think there's a personal transition in all our lives where we move from a prism of just personal gain, just where lower levels of consciousness, meta consciousness that David Hawkins talks about, it's around 200. And then when we go above that 200, then, this aperture of awareness opens up and we start thinking, well, how can I be of service to the greater good? And now everything we do in terms of money and houses and cars and toys becomes a byproduct. It's no longer the primary focus of what we're doing, but it might still be a byproduct. Because there's nothing wrong with creating a beautiful life for yourself. There's nothing wrong, per se, with having $1 billion. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of these things because the universe is abundant. It's living through you. It's experiencing life through you. But what is the intention behind it? And are you taking all the responsibility and all the accountability for every little thing that you do? And I'll close with this because a lot of people, I had a client and he said, I've gone to Tibet a few times and I spent 2 weeks on the mountain, and he was like really lauding himself for all this spiritual stuff that he was doing. And then we had to get something at the grocery store, and he was an absolute prick to the cashier. And I told him, I don't think you learned anything in Tibet. And he was looking at me with these big eyes. If you can't see the sacredness of even a single human being that she didn't mean anything to him, right? But, really taking responsibility is seeing like, well, how am I affecting this entire universe, this entire mosaic of humanity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. If it's okay with Robin, we'll let Athena come in and kind of give us her thoughts on the discussion we've been having up to this point.
It seems to us as though all of you have experienced your lives in a little bit different way and come to the same conclusion that really satisfaction, your happiness, and the being a benefit and of service to all that is really what life is all about. It's what will bring you the most happiness. It's what will bring you the most joy, the most alignment that you can ever get is in the way that you move in the world. But we would tell you, we heard you earlier in your conversation, Robert, when you mentioned your inner world was falling apart. We just want to say that inner world would never fall apart because it is part of you. Your spirituality, or what you would deem your connection, it never leaves you. It is that you in your outer world were beginning to feel your disconnection from your inner world, but it wasn't that your inner world was falling apart. So we just want to make that little notation or correction that was in perfect standing and always would be. The divine part of yourself is always present and ever flowing into the energy centers, the chakras, the body that belongs to you. And dependent on what you can allow in, what you can actually receive in the amount of energy through those energy centers is going to determine your health, your well-being, your ability to move in the world in ways that are satisfactory to you and others. All of that energy that is coming in through the system, through those centers, is actually what provides you with your ability to do that. You see, a lot of humans don't understand that when they fall into judgment of themselves or others, even in the view of someone who has treated someone inhumanely, as you have mentioned, you've temporarily lost your own connection, because as you view someone in a little bit of a feeling of distaste of them, you automatically become that emanation. You become that very thing that you are sending out to the universe, that you are observing in another. So it is very important that a human lives sovereignly, that they understand that their view is reflected at them and the universe. And therefore, they must be very cognizant of how they feel, even when they are viewing others who are finding themselves out of alignment, or perhaps moving in ways that you think are not appropriate or kind. Let's use that word. So we say all the time, it has nothing to do about right and wrong. It has nothing to do with good or bad. It has everything to do about feelings, emanations of emotion that are coming out of you. This is what you need to be most accountable in the lives that you are living. If you cannot be accountable for the way that you feel, then you will be adding that feeling to the universe unknowingly, you see. So we want to make this very important point, this statement really, that the most important thing that you can contribute to yourself and to the universe is to pay close attention to the feelings that you are feeling, and do not use anything, hear that, anything outside of yourself as a congruent reason or a belief that you are entitled to that feeling, that somehow that one deserves you to feel that way about them, because inadvertently you are now joining them in the same feeling that they are a part of, and you are actually expanding the very thing that you are in distaste of. And you will actually come to meet, or it'll come to pass, that more and more people will come into your purview or your exchange that will be doing the same thing to you, that you are having to observe and having to point out and having to not like, you see. So that's the only comment that we would make. In our biggest statement that we would ever make is that the most important thing that any human can do in their experience is to live sovereignly and be accountable for the feelings you emit from the human vessel that you are in.
Thank you. So in Robert's sample chapter that we all have looked over. He says, "No man is free who is not the master of himself." And for our listeners, you know that mastery is something Athena talks about all the time. And it isn't just being really good at everything, it's being allowing of feelings, negative, positive, all of it. Mike, would you like to give us some of your ideas about mastery and what you've learned about that in your profession and life?
Yeah. Well, this kind of ties in, but I kind of have a question, like, or thought based on what Robert said as well, and maybe it ties into this, maybe it doesn't.
Well, you can go ahead, do both. Sure.
Yeah, it is kind of like tied into like mastery of your own feelings and emotions and being a human and like understanding what you are in your place and whatever. But Robert mentioned kind of the eye-opening thing of snorting the cocaine and the Mexican blood in your nose. And just made me think about like everything that you do, everything that you eat, everything that you see or whatever, right? Like it all comes from somewhere. Like, so I guess my thought and question to anyone is like, how far do you take that? You know, like how, like, I don't eat veal, for example. I don't really like it, but I just also don't eat it, you know, whatever. So do you just not eat an animal? Do you have to worry about every little thing? So like, that's just one microcosm of life where it's like, how far do you take those things that you think about to actually be a happy human versus just living and existing and being like okay with things, right?
Can we weigh in on that, Mike? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
What we would say to that is the universe draws its conclusion based upon intent. Certainly, it is not your intent to ever harm an animal if you were to eat veal. That's not where you emanate from or the kind of being that you are. Yeah. So it is to understand yourself, your motive, your intent. That would be the thing that the universe would be responding to, in fact. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I guess I was thinking more so along the lines of like, there's all these little things to like think about. Do you like burden yourself essentially with thinking about all those things that are?
Yeah. Well, if I may add,
Yeah.
and it's along the lines. So everything you know consciously, what you're doing, right? Which is there's actually a lot of things that we do unconsciously. And in fact, as long as you do it unconsciously, there's a level of innocence to that because you're just not aware, right? And so as you rise in awareness and you become more conscious of everything you do, now you can make a conscious choice. And if the intention is not to harm that animal, but you make a conscious choice to eat it anyway, it's not good or bad. It's just a conscious choice. And so we can go through the world making ever more conscious decisions on how we show up, what do we do, how do we respond to situations, right? And so if someone cuts you off on the highway, a lot of people will just derail into anger. And it's sort of unconscious because it's just a programming, they're triggered, you know, in some way. They can't really control it. But if you are consciously aware in that moment, I can choose anger or I can just let it go. Now you have a choice. And you can make a choice. Oh, I'm just going to allow this anger to just rage through me. I'm going to raise my middle finger and say all kinds of nasty names and whatever. Well, that's a conscious choice. And that will affect the universe in that way. Or in that moment, you can say, you know, this is actually really not that important. Maybe he was on the way because he got a call that his wife is sick and is in the hospital, you know, who knows? And maybe you can just disarm the anger and just let it go and say, you know, I guess he was really in a rush or she was really in a rush. And so it's really more about making conscious choices. So that which you're consciously aware of. And so you can, and it's not about that being a burden. It's just, you know, we just make choices. What do we participate in?
Brad, would you like to comment?
Oh, sorry, Heidi, I was going to ask if you could ask that question again because I sort of derailed everything.
That's all right, Mike. Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll go back to Brad.
Okay. Can you repeat that question again about mastery?
Oh, sure. No man is free who is not the master of himself. Like, how has that been playing out in your experience?
I think let's let Brad answer that. I know he'll have a good answer for that.
Okay, Brad, we'll go to you for that.
Okay. On the last one, I don't know as much as these guys do probably on it, but what I would just say on his level of ignorance probably matters. If you're ignorant to things, you're unconscious and you're doing things that are potentially not good, but you just don't know any better. And then there's a level of consciousness, like Robert just said, you're choosing to do stuff that you know is not right. And that's probably a higher level of sticky mess you got yourself in. So it's just, as you get more conscious, you get less ignorant and you make better choices. And when you're super unconscious, you're just spraying shit all over the wall and you don't know what's going on. So I don't know what, I mean, that's that, I guess.
The origin of that quote, by the way, is that when you're run by your subconscious programming, just the programming that you have from your upbringing, your religious belief, what the world has told you, culture and culturation, right? You're actually not free. You're just running on that program. You as a person don't really have that much free will because you're just being, guided by these reactions of your program. And this is what we see quite a bit. I just watched a documentary. It's called Ordinary Men. It was about these ordinary German citizens that became the Nazi police force that, committed a lot of atrocities and things like that. And it was very interesting because these were very ordinary men. And in their way, whether you're good, bad, or indifferent, they were just doing what they thought was the right thing. And so it kind of highlighted that, when we don't have that level of consciousness, we're really just running on these programs. We're not free. Free in the sense that we can actually really make a conscious choice because our programming is really running us. And so part of, I think, rising in consciousness and working on ourselves and gaining mastery of life itself is to become more and more aware, what programming is running me. And when it rises to your level of awareness, now we can make conscious choices about it. Is that something I want in my life? Is that a way I want to express, or is there a different way that I want to express? And now we can start overriding these subconscious patterns that really are just deeply lodged inside us and are, for the most part, running the show.
Yeah. I had a conversation with Athena a couple days ago. I had an experience where I felt myself being upset with someone, and I was at first kind of thinking, why can't I release this? Why can't I release this? And Athena and I had a discussion about me as the human being the experiencer of that emotion, and just to allow myself to feel that experience. And, I caught myself. I didn't allow myself to spiral into unconsciousness, but I was wondering if Athena would like to weigh in on that and on mastery itself.
Yeah, we love talking about mastery because it's really the key to creating the reality that you're going to love while you are here. But the one thing we would like to bring to all of your attention, and most of you know it anyway, is the idea that you need to prevent anything or suppress anything is a false one, because you would not have the angry driver coming into your purview, and nor would you have to move to a place of not feeling and deciding that I am not going to react to that emotion that is in me that is wanting love from me. You see, this is what we teach in mastery, that when an emotion arises and you have the car driver pull out in front of you and you feel the rage and the anger go through you and the middle finger go up, as you said, yeah, this is the time for you to love your human and to look at where that anger was born. How is it that you lived your life as a child? What is it that you had to experience that caused that type of an emotion to become overactive or out of balance? And then to let your human know that it is not picking the wrong emotion, because it has felt experiences similar to that many times, and it is simply running a program, as you said. But the way that you get around that program is by loving the human, is by accepting what the human feels. The human is a tool. It is one that experiences life based upon what it has already lived, what it is presently living, and then some of the lineages tied in there. And so we can't expect the human by itself, this vessel that you are in, to make a decision that you would deem as being the right one or appropriate one. But as you become adept at mastery, and mastery is feeling the emotion immediately that is caused by an experience and moving to love and acceptance of it, embracing it, understanding where it came from, not making yourself wrong, not guilting yourself, not judging yourself, not trying to change it or make it go away, and not even trying to take your attention off of it by choosing something else, but by simply sitting with it in the love of self, in what you experienced first, because whatever you have felt is a charge of energy. It's emotion that is being expanded in the divine part of you. And so we say there's no good or bad. There's no right and wrong. Everything's causing you to become more. The universe is expanding constantly. Everybody knows it. And this is why. It's not because you felt the right thing or the wrong thing or the good thing or the bad thing. And that is what makes you worthy. That's not what it is. You are worthy in every feeling that you have, even the pooey ones, even the ones with the middle finger up. Now, we know this is the way that you don't want to create all the time, and we don't want you to do that either, because once you start following the preference, but you have to love the human first. You have to go to the human and say, accept what you have felt. I understand why you have felt it. I can see the life that you have lived has caused it. I'm grateful for the experience that you have given me and expanded me in the divine part of myself. I'm grateful, you see. And now the human feels really good about that, and it starts to rise in its vibration. It starts to let go of the anger. Now the middle finger is not going up so easily anymore, because it's no longer containing the entrapment in the energy center. It's let it go. It's decided it's worthy. It's joining you in love, and it becomes aligned to you. Then the divine part of you starts flowing experiences to you, lovely experiences, and you start feeling them, and you start thinking, wow, I love the way this feels. I think I've been thinking positively, and I've been getting things that make me feel really good. And so all of a sudden, that creation that used to come from the middle finger being up, by the way, starts to come from feeling good. It starts to come from feeling joyful, but it's never going to come in suppression. It's never going to come in, I'm going to conform myself, change myself, make myself better than what I am. That is not how you get the change that you want. You get the change in the love of self, and the love of self is I wave the flag to my experience and what my human draws as a conclusion in the way that it feels, and I allow that feeling. I love that feeling. I don't make it wrong for that feeling. And in that way, I attach or join to the divinity that I am, and the behavior that I want becomes the behavior that I want, you see.
Good. Okay. So, Robert, you mentioned you were claircognizant and clairsentient. For our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with those terms, can you kind of let them know what that means
Sure.
for
Yeah.
you?
Well, there's many, and first of all, there's nothing special about me, because everybody is hardwired and pre-packaged to have these abilities. They just happen to come online for me, and I've cultivated them since then. So claircognizance is that I just know. So I don't necessarily, clairvoyant would be I see energy. I have claircognizance in that I just know things. I'll be in a situation, I'll be on a phone call, I'll be in a meeting, or I'll be coaching someone, and I just know. And I don't know how I know. I cannot explain where it comes from. I cannot rationally explain X, Y, and Z. I just know. Now, when this first happened, you have to imagine I was, working in the outer world, so to speak. I use these terms to explain concepts, right? And I was very much, in my mind, and not so much my heart. And so I was very rationally oriented. I was very, this is the path, these are the steps, this is like logical. And when you then have claircognizance come online, and you just have a knowing, but you cannot explain it, now you're kind of starting to negotiate with your ego, because your ego says, well, that's not possible. It can't be like that. The thing is that this universe is not necessarily linear the way our mind works. This universe can do whatever it wants to, wherever it wants to, however it wants to. And so that non-linearity is just not comprehensible with your mind. And so then you have to kind of learn, I had to learn, let me put it that way, to trust this knowing. And so I call that the intelligence of the heart. That has a language, and that language is feeling, sensing, intuiting, and direct knowing. And these are whispers usually. And then in our body, we feel that as a knot in our stomach. We feel very good about a decision, and so our body is actually a very potent dashboard that gives us feedback all the time about these things. Now, clairsentience is that I feel energy. So I have a heightened sense of energy when I go into rooms, I go into situations. Oftentimes I'll have a precognition. It just doesn't feel good. So I then listen to it nowadays, and I might not go to that meeting, or I might not, decide to have an exploratory call with, a potential client or a business situation. It could be anything in life. It could be something I'm wrestling with in my personal life or with my kids. So this feeling of energy, I also notice it with people that they might say one thing, but I feel the energy is what they're saying is not what they're feeling. And so then I can ask some questions to open up, ask them, to invite them to open up. And then a lot of times it turns out there's actually something completely different, but they felt for, socially conditioned reasons, they couldn't say that, or they couldn't express that, or whatever. And so this is clairsentience. And like I said, everybody has these capacities. There's nothing special about Robert. Channeling, like I did my book, everybody's a tuning fork in a way. That's the way I explain it. And when my tuning fork is in the same frequency as that cluster consciousness that I channeled, then that cluster consciousness through my crown chakra opens up and it can express itself through me. And the energy that comes into me is somehow translated into words into a book. The moment I step in and I try to think about it, that channel closes, at least for me. Now, I'm not someone that goes into trance. I do this while I'm fully aware. So I'm very cognizant of where I am, time and place, but everybody does this in a little bit different way. I know Paul Selig goes in a complete trance. He does no recollection whatsoever when he channels. I do. But, I couldn't explain to you why my way of channeling is different than, and maybe Robin can explain what her experience is, because it might be very different from the way it occurs for me.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember a lot of it afterwards. In fact, by the time I walk from my office back to the house, everything is gone. I feel bad sometimes because I've had such really wonderful, intimate exchanges with people, and I cannot literally even remember their faces or the conversation, but I think it's meant to be that way because you would just take on too much if you remembered everything. So as far as in regard to why is it different for everyone, I think that's one of the things that prevents people from getting the connection that they want to get, is that they want to make it like somebody else's or have a preconceived idea of how it should go or how it's going to look. And that can actually hang you up because, I know that Athena has told them in sessions that the universe holds just not you in the life that you're in, but you in all the lives that you've lived, and it knows your lineage. And so there's this massive energy that when it does decide that you're going to get connection or you decide to connect to it, you get an experience that you yourself as a human could not possibly imagine for yourself. And for me, I have to say that was 100% true. I mean, this happened to me in my early 60s. I loved spirituality. It was a passion for me, but I just really enjoyed it. I had a friend that was a channeler. I loved listening to it. But if you would have told me at this age that I would be working with my sister, that I'd have 2 kids that are open to it, that we all have conversations about it, that this would actually be my life and what I'm doing, I could not have ever pulled that experience to my mind of what I would have thought would have been the most satisfying thing. But in fact, it is. This is probably it trumped, or I shouldn't say trumped, but equaled motherhood, because raising my kids was my passion, and very important to me that they turned out like they did, that they were good humans, and that I was proud of that work that I did as a parent. But this is so satisfying, and it's so satisfying because my sister loves it and we do it together, and it's not about the money. It's about just really doing what you love and getting up every morning and not even having to think about it. And even though you're in a chair sometimes all day doing sessions, you just feel moved to do it. It feels as though something's moving you. It's like you're not even doing it, but there's a lot of pleasure and joy while you're doing it. Now, of course, you have to be there, and it is a sense of work. So there are times when I can't do the things that I normally would love to do. And this, you could say, it prevents me from time to time, but there's never a time where I think, and I would say it was the same in motherhood, where I just would decide that it's not worth the sacrifice, or I'm not going to do it today. You just do it because you love it, and you just raise your kids because you love them. And it's the same. This is the way the universe wants to deliver it to you. It wants to deliver something that's so satisfying. So my advice to anyone listening would be, just don't put a parameter around it. Don't even try to think about how it might come, because it's not going to match what you and your human mind would ever imagine for yourself.
And I would just second that I didn't choose this to come online. It happened. I guess in a way I was ready, but it's not like I went to Columbia Business School and I went through all the classes and I got an MBA at the end. This was nothing like that, right? It's not like, now I did go later. I found metaphysical universities that could show me and teach me. And I've had some mentors that miraculously showed up, because the teacher shows up when the student is ready, because I was really curious. And how can I perfect this? How can I work with this? What does this mean? You know, I was very intrigued by it. And so I did kind of cultivate it and honor it as a gift that, you know, there was something for me to do with this. But if you would have told me last year that, you know, in March, you're going to have a 650-page book come through you in a massive download that you write down in an hour and 15 minutes with all the chapters and all the sacred geometry that's in my book, I would have told you you're crazy. I wasn't even thinking about writing a second book. And I would have just thought you were completely out of your mind. Even though I was already, you know, having these capacities, I had no idea there was a book coming through. And then, you know, the second or third day after that download, I cleared my calendar, because it became clear to me that this was bigger than me, and I had to do this. I felt compelled to write it. And I devoted 2.5 months, 5-6 hours a day, but it was the joy of my life. I was in the happiest. I mean, the energy, you know, and later on I had some, that was a blueprint for me on how to be in a very, very highly coherent, elevated energy of being. And then it would just pour through me. And the moment I start thinking, the moment I think I know better, my ego knows better, the channel closes. Right? So it's there's a blueprint there. We have to get out of the way.
Yeah.
Was that consistent for you daily, or did it like come?
I only took 5 days off, which was, I took my kids. I have 3 kids, and I took them to Austin, where we used to live. They were all born there. So I took them the first week of summer vacation. I took them to Austin for 5 days. It's the only 5 days I did not write. And other than that, I wrote basically a chapter a day.
So Robert, I'd like to ask, because I know you did very high profile business things for a lot of your life, and now you're more on this spiritual journey with your book and your teachings. How do you feel about that life versus this life? Do you feel genuinely more fulfilled every day versus what you used to do, or do you feel no difference between the two different life paths that you're leading?
I feel very different. But first of all, I'm very grateful for the life that I did have, because every single moment of it, even the many what we call bad moments, but you know, as Athena in Truth says, there are no bad moments, because these are all lessons I needed to learn. And so I look back at that entire collective chapter, that kind of, you know, scene in my movie of my life, that it was there to prepare me for something which I had no idea was going to come. And I had to go through these trials and tribulations, and I had to fall from grace, and I had to go for all these different things. And some of it was heart-wrenching and all that stuff, and lose my money. But I needed to go through it so I can do what I do today, which is write books like this. And I work with CEOs and, you know, entrepreneurs and game changers, people in places of power and influence, people, you know, exactly the way in places where I used to be. And I understand that world, because I come from that world, and I know what it's like to be in that place and to awaken. And so part of my core mission with my one-on-one work with people is I work with, you know, a limited amount of people every year. And I work with those that have a great resemblance to where I came from and the path I walked, because that's a lived experience for me. I can teach that path because I lived it and I understand that world. Now, my book and other work and speaking, that's more for a broader audience. You know, and I love that, actually. I love these podcasts. I love speaking opportunities. I love writing books. It's a passion. I'm writing my 3rd book right now about the exalted masculine. And so, you know, I get to work on things that I really, truly enjoy. And I still dabble. I still sit on some boards. So I'm still active in the real world, just not nearly to the extent that I was. And I really like this mentorship role, because, you know, I'm a little older as well, and I don't really want to run a business anymore. I've done there, you know, been there, got the t-shirt, you know, I did. There's nothing there new for me, where to this, what I do now, which includes actually really working on my own mastery every day, there's not a boring day in my life. You know, you're never done learning. You're never done growing.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, I'm going to ask him if he could share a little bit about his journey and suffering sometimes that he went through what he learned in his work, those types of things, because we've talked about that a lot, and I think our listeners would be interested in hearing about that.
Well, yeah, I think maybe it's like a somewhat smaller version of Robert's in terms of I've had a lot of that extreme suffering and those mini blowouts. Maybe not the full. Everything was just more watered down, I think. But I think the spiritual path and this, I don't even know what the words are, to know your true self and kind of separate from the human experience and just accept it and be it, or not be it, but let it happen. I think that's been something I've been fighting with my whole life in a way. And the experiences in my job have just made that kind of happen faster for me, because it's you're feeling a lot of emotions. I think similar to what Robert said, when you're in a position of being the CEO or having lots of people under you, it's a faster process in terms of the emotions you're going to feel from. I think markets and trading and things can introduce that like in a different way, but similar. So that's probably why I'm in this job, because the spiritual path is really bubbling up in me since I was, I don't know, early 20s probably. I'm 42 now. So the job is kind of hand in hand with that. It's always helping me grow and helping me feel things. And what was the question? I lost the question again now.
I guess we were more just talking about, and I think you did cover it, where you can actually be on a path in your profession where it's magnifying things in your experience that at the time when you're feeling them, you don't really want to be feeling them. But now looking back on it, you can see where that suffering was necessary in order for you to get where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, there really is no life. There's no work life and home life. There's just one life, and there's emotions everywhere. Interpersonal relations. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so constantly dealing with those emotions. And I'm sure Robert knows that, and you know that. Heidi and everyone knows that. Mike, not yet, but everyone. And so there's those emotions. There's the work emotions, but they're all just tools to accelerate you spiritually. And every day there's something getting pressed about fear, scarcity, control, and like Robert said, the pipe is always open. You're in bliss every day unless you decide to attach to the human experience, and then you're miserable. So it's a matter of how good can you get at letting the flow, let the sun shine through, that's always shining, and not be the cloud that gets in the way. And it's understanding it intellectually and then having it be the reality of your life. I think that's the thing. I mean, when does that happen? I think for him, it was more spontaneous, but probably everyday work. And for me, it's been stepping 3 steps forward, 2 steps back into that. It's really turned up the last, I would say, 6 months, because I had a lot of suffering the last 18 months before that. And that really turned the switch to that extreme suffering is a really good teacher. I don't know if you have to have it, but it sure helps you get out of the human and just let it do its thing, and not make it your life, not make it miserable if so-and-so doesn't do what you want, or you don't have the money. You just kind of, can accept it.
There's poetry in suffering, in that, I call crisis, catastrophe, and calamity, these are divine gifts wrapped in sandpaper. Because, when the gravy train is running full bore and everything is going great, and, everything is just sunny and rosy, and the money is going in and life seems grand, that's beautiful. Suck it up. I mean, suck that nectar up as much as you can in that moment. Because nothing, Heraclitus said, nothing ever is, everything is becoming. And so, life will always go through cycles. Things change, things come and go. And then when we do inevitably find some crisis, catastrophe, or calamity in our life, and that could be the death of a loved one, that could be a divorce, that could be a business, that can be a recession that wipes us out, or an illness that hits us. I mean, it's always there as a gift. These are gifts in life. They're painful sometimes, but that's just the human experience, because we label them painful. Right. They're neither good or wrong. They're just there to show us something. There's a lesson in all of it. And so when I look back now, and not when I was in the moment, when I was laying in the fetus position, crying my eyes out, I mean, I was miserable, pain. But I look back at it now, and what it did, it cracked my heart wide open. And I didn't have eyes for a lot of things in the world. because I was quite successful and I had what I call the Midas touch for 20, 25 years. Everything I touched turned into gold. Now, yes, I worked hard and I did all those things, but like I had a really fortunate, so I had a beautiful experience in that sense. Now, when that fell away, you know, I start to realize that, you know, this is not the experience that everybody has for a variety of reasons, you know, and some compassion came up, and I never had that compassion before, you know, and now I what I love about Robin's book when I read it last week is that, you know, when we can step away from this judgment, we can just, because I'm convinced everybody, every single human being is doing the best they can in this moment. I'm convinced of that. Now, what the best they have available, accessible to them right in this moment, we might say, well, that's pretty ugly. But that's, again, just a judgment. But there's nobody that purposely dials it back 20% and says, I'm just throttling back on, you know, no. Everybody in every moment, everywhere, is always doing the best they can in that moment. Mm-hmm. That's what they have accessible. That's what they do. And so when you look at the world that way, you know, now you can start looking at some of these people that are creating big problems for humanity, and you're like, that's the best they have accessible. Mm-hmm. That's just what they have accessible right now. If they could do better, they would. If they had it in them, right? And so there's probably patterns of thinking, deep wounding. There's all sorts of, you know, things that are causing why they're showing up.
We got to comment again, yeah? What we would like to add is that none of it's wrong and none of it needs to be done better. Understand that emotions emitted are growing the universe and in a positive direction. Matters whether they are positive or negative. And I know this is really difficult for a human to understand, but as the human does it wrong, as you see a human doing it wrong, let's use that term. We're not speaking to you directly, Robert. We're just saying in general. But as you view someone who has done something or lived in a way that you would deem that you would not live, rather than looking at it as though that's the best they can do, they've done well. We say an experience is well done. And why is that? Because it's emitted emotion and an energy, and that energy has been received by the divine and has been lifted to the vibration of which the divine vibrates at. And so could it be done better? Should it be done better? Isn't the universe getting better by everything that every human does? The only reason it wouldn't be getting better is inadvertently some of us would look at it and think they've done it wrong and think that they need to do it different, but they don't. You need to look at when someone does something wrong as though, thank you for that. I know what direction I prefer. I know where I want to put my focus, not on your enoughness or what you've done that isn't enough, but my focus is going to go to the preference. And the preference is what the universe gets every single time a human emotes, positive or negative. Every single time that a human emotes, there's a better thing in the divine born because of it. So it's the human aspect of us that thinks people need to start all being better. People need to all start doing it differently. And we know this is going to go against what some of you believe, but not really. Because as you look at them in love, in appreciation for showing you what you personally don't want to focus on or want in your life, that you direct your attention to the preference and then therefore grow that preference. And then your experience is very positive because of it. And this is your personal sovereign contribution to the universe that you are giving, not based upon what you viewed in others, but what you've chosen by what you have viewed in others. It's quite different concept. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as humans, the suffering and the negative emotions largely come about more often because we tend to dwell there. And I know to the universe, it doesn't matter. It's just a charge of emotion. But I think we deliver large impacts of charges through our negative emotions and suffering. And Mike, I was just going to ask you if you wanted to weigh in on that topic at all about suffering and how that's been for you in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, had my fair share of different stuff at different levels, but I think the thing I've learned though, I think through going through stuff is, and what I'm doing better at now is figuring out what I don't want to do. And I think that's really important because I have opportunities that come up a lot for, big opportunities to make more money or to do something. And through my experiences of suffering, I've learned even if I'm really good at something, doesn't necessarily mean that I want to do it or want to be doing it, because I have to be aware and conscious that if I'm going to do that, it's going to cause that suffering. One example of that is managing people. I've managed I have had about 80 people under me at one place, and built the team up, and I can't help but not care about people. So what I do is I take on their suffering and I take on this role of what I think is the right thing to do versus what a policy says or what the company might say, right? Or what somebody else who is in control says. Even though I have a large amount of autonomy to make decisions, I ultimately take on the suffering of everybody else and then myself for not having the control. And then therefore I become miserable and unhappy. So I realized that, and most people I think would say I'm a good manager, and I would consider myself to be a good manager because I care about people and want them to be successful. So what I realized over time is that I shouldn't be managing people because it makes me miserable. And I'm not going to put my best version forward for those people or for the other people in my life who are actually important. So I've turned down a lot of opportunities to take on new projects or to start new companies or to build something or to run something big, because I just don't want to do it anymore. Because I pretty much realized that I can't control that part about me. So I think some of the ways I've avoided suffering is to avoid doing the things that I don't want to do. Or even the work that I don't want to do. Or the things that sometimes bring back these PTSD moments of when I was doing that, I had really a bunch of anxiety and a bunch of stress for 4 or 5 years. And I remember not sleeping. I remember working 18 hours a day. And so when that task comes up and gets presented to me, hey, you should run this whole thing for me. I know you can do it. I know you're really good at it. You know exactly what to do. I'm thinking, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to feel that way again. So I am now making these decisions and not putting money and those things at the forefront of the things that I choose to do, and instead trying to think about my own health and well-being. Because if I'm happy and I have positive feelings around me, I feel like that way I can kind of create more positivity and influence to other people that I care about and other people around me, versus me being like a zombie and dragging around because I'm not happy every day, right? So I don't know, that kind of explains how I view it. And I also went through the ups and downs and lost a bunch of money last year and had to go through that whole ego check and the sky is falling and what am I going to do? And I worked 10 years for all this and lost it all. It's yeah, you gotta pick yourself back up and figure it out. But there's got to be a lesson there somewhere. So I'm still probably learning that one.
Yeah. Well, Robert, if our listeners would like to order your book or learn more about you, would you like to give us your website, how to find you, how to purchase your book or books? I understand you have more than one out.
Yeah, there was a first book I published into 2021 that's called Never Enoughitis. Both my books are on Amazon, and you can order them all major booksellers. So if you Google by my last name, it's Love Plus Truth or Never Enoughitis, which is this disease I had that it was never enough. I was always moving the goalpost, and so I described this whole story, up the mountain peak, so to speak, and then down the hill, and then the third part of that book is kind of how I got myself out of that valley that I found myself in. And I have a website, www.robertalthuis.com. That's also my handle for Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, on YouTube. I think I just started out, on TikTok at Robert Althuis. So it's quite easy to find me in these various places. If anybody's interested to work with me or has any questions, you can book a call on my website. I'm happy to speak with anybody that's interested, or you can just DM me in one of these various ways. So there's many easy ways to get a hold of me. And I would love for people to pick up this book. This Love and Truth was really, it was a profound book for me actually to write. it was really, you know, it was a beautiful experience, and it's given me a lot already. The feedback so far is really positive. I've had some beautiful reviews and testimonials, so it's touching something in people. I think it's maybe a book of this time, because we do have a lot of questions, and we do have a lot of things where we have to, like Mike was explaining, we have to really start, you know, follow our preferences. And our preferences might not be what the world originally taught us. Like, you know, you need to have a big business and manage a lot of people and make a lot of money and those things, because that's sort of what the world tells us to do. And as Mike was just explaining, he's coming to this place where he's saying, well, that's actually not what makes me happy. That's actually not what brings me in a place of joy. And so that's just preferences being expressed. And how would you know, other than having lived that, know how it made you feel, right? And then you make other choices now. And this is why we experience everything we experience. It's all just a lesson. It's all just showing us something. And if we go inside and we then follow these preferences, as Athena in truth says, I mean, there's no experience that's wrong. It's showing you something. And I think, generally speaking, you can summarize. People ask me, what's your purpose? What's your meaning? Well, the purpose is to be happy. The purpose is to find joy and bliss. And so follow that. And your heart will tell you where that is. But we have to follow our preferences. And it's all just breadcrumbs, you know, because whatever doesn't work out in our life, you know, and I'm using these words to explain concepts, but everything always works out. But, you know, whatever we don't like, or the results or the outcomes that we don't like, they say, okay, no, I'll learn that. That gets, these choices get me those results. Well, if I want different results, you got to make different choices, different preferences. Right? And in the end, all these experiences are beautiful. They're all poetic.
Well, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. Brad, we're going to say goodbye to, because he has somewhere here.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Nice to meet you, Robert. And
No,
I'll
my
get the
pleasure.
book.
Thank you.
Yeah, me
Appreciate
too.
it.
I'll be reading the book. You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Good seeing the
Thanks.
family.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
And I just had to make thanks. Bye, Brad. I just had to make an announcement. Robin and I have been asking our listeners for topics for future YouTubes. We've gotten a lot of good responses. So I just wanted to let everybody know we will be choosing a couple of those topics and getting them going pretty soon in the near future. So we wanted to share that with listeners. And thank you, Robert, for coming on. We really enjoyed having you. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. I hope our listeners got a lot out of today's program.
Yeah,
pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Athena in truth as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Robert, thanks. I appreciate the way you break things down really simply to concepts to understand, even though sometimes they're really complex, but you do a really good job of just making it all make sense.
Super.
I agree.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for the compliment, Mike.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.